Hello, welcome to AP Sources Simplified. Today we are looking at the report by the Kerner Commission, which was organized by President Lyndon Johnson. The report was released in 1968 and detailed many of the racial problems that plagued American society. In the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement had made incredible legal progress, from the Brown v. Board decision that called for schools to be desegregated. Several presidential actions like President Eisenhower's sending in federal troops to escort black students to school in Little Rock. And the movement seemed to culminate with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which legally banned many types of discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which struck down poll taxes and literacy tests which had kept Black Americans from achieving any sort of political representation for decades. However, these events and acts did not resolve the social and economic inequalities in society. By the mid to late 1960s, many civil rights and protest movements began to splinter, with some groups taking a much more militant stance. In the African American civil rights movement, there had always been different philosophical approaches going all the way back to the late 1800s, with Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. In the 1950s and early 1960s, MLK had a counterpart in Malcolm X, who offered a more Black social and economic liberation movement that was not dependent upon a white assistance approach. In the mid to late 1960s, the more confrontational Black Power movement and Black Panthers picked up steam. This more confrontational approach, also fueled by the deep poverty, systemic racism, and lack of opportunity for Black youth, manifested in riots occurring over the course of several summers in major cities across the U.S. The riots of 1967, however, were the most serious, engulfing 22 cities in July and August. 43 people were killed in Detroit alone, nearly all of them Black, and $50 million worth of property was destroyed. President Johnson called in the National Guard and U.S. Army troops. In 1967, the worst of the riots occurred in 22 cities across the United States over the course of 2 months. While Black leaders understood why the riots were happening, they tried to calm them. MLK went to one of the worst hit areas of the riots, Watts, Los Angeles. His appearance did not have the intended effect, as he was even heckled by the crowd, with one person shouting, "We don't need your dreams, we need jobs." President Johnson, dismayed by the violence, organized a presidential commission to study and produce a report on the situation. This will be led by Illinois Governor Otto Kerner. Now, taking a look at the key points of the report, it provided both causes of the situation and possible remedies. First, on the causes, can be summed up with this line from the report. Our nation is moving toward two societies, one Black and one white, separate and unequal. Again, it is important to think about the context. This is after the Civil and Voting Rights Acts. So while those were great pieces of legislation, they did not change the day-to-day struggle felt by many Black Americans. The report did not excuse the rioters, but put their actions into context with their hopeless situation, as they had been shut out of a white-dominated society with no real economic opportunity to live out the American dream. For a solution, the report called for a costly and drastic aid to Black communities. Unless programs were quickly created to help the situation, the report said that there would be a, quote, continuing polarization of the American community and ultimately the destruction of basic democratic values. Now, taking a look at the report's intentions, it is from the point of view of politicians, many of whom had experience in dealing with race relations and riots, and their purpose was to create an honest and forthright government report about race. Finally, let's take a look at the legacy of the report. President Johnson mostly rejected the report. In my speculation, I believe this is because he felt he was in the process of tackling the problem with his Great Society and War on Poverty programs already in place. However, the public, scared by the riots, would turn away from liberalism in the 1968 election and towards Richard Nixon, who promised a conservative approach and a return to law and order. 1 month after the report was released, Martin Luther King was assassinated and riots broke out in more than 100 cities across the United States. Looking much later down the road, The report contained pretty accurate predictions about the future if the problems were not addressed, one of which was that cities will have black majorities by 1985, and the suburbs will remain largely all white. In the late 1990s, two reports were funded by the Eisenhower Foundation, and they found that the divides between white and black society had only increased. Quoting from the Locked in the Poorhouse report, "Today, 30 years after the Kerner Report, there is more poverty in America. It is deeper, blacker, and browner than before, and it is more concentrated in the cities, which have become America's poorhouses." Okay, I hope you liked the video and it could help you out. I appreciate it if you'd give that like button below a smash and subscribe to the channel.